Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Passionately Wrong podcast with James and myself, Randy. And today we're going to talk about enlisting in the Army. So another Army one for anyone who's interested. I guess I could start with my story about enlisting in the Army, which is probably significantly different than a lot of people's nowadays. I enlisted in 1987. We were relatively at peace. The last thing that had really happened of significance was Grenada in 83. And I had just finished a year in college. I wasn't really enthusiastic about going to college to begin with. And then I displayed that by scoring really low grades. and then since I grew up like with you, James, overseas, we never saw a recruiter. No recruiter ever came to our school. I don't know if we got any literature in the mail. I don't know if we got any literature in the mail. Most high schools, there's a lot of high schools that have junior ROTC programs. I don't know if that was true back when we were young, but nowadays I've actually participated in them where I go to high schools and talk to people as a active duty military person, and I would answer questions in the auditorium and things like that. But even if they don't have a junior ROTC program, there's usually a recruiter that might set up a desk in a dining facility or something and answer questions.
Can I ask a question right up at the start here? And it concerns the ROTC thing, as you explained your own choices. That I presume stands for Reserve Officer Training Course, or what is OTC?
Core.
All right. Enlisting is just, maybe you could explain to me and to people who don't know, what's the difference between trying to become an officer and just enlisting? And why wouldn't you, is one route obviously better than the other? Can anyone go either route? What's the things that would fall into your choice of which way to go or which way you can go? Does that make sense? I just don't know the difference.
No, it makes sense. But let's go back in history, right? Traditionally, officers were educated people who had college education. So if you look at World War II and you look at the draft and Vietnam, they drafted the officers. They could have a history degree or an English degree, but they had a degree, which means ideally, if you have a degree, you can learn stuff because you've been in a learning facility for 4 years or something. If you look at Saving Private Ryan, I think Tom Hanks' character was like a history teacher, I think, or something like that, right? So they go to an officer basic course to learn leadership, and then they're put in charge of troops and they go to war during the draft, because that's how quick everyone went over there. So and then at certain types, especially in World War II and Vietnam, where maybe the bad guys are always trying to take out the leaders, thinking that the non-leaders will be in chaos without their leadership. And so the officers would obviously get marked by snipers or try to be taken out first. And as a result, you had less and less officers available as the war progressed. And a lot of times, if they saw leadership capability within the enlisted ranks, they would, have a battlefield promotion. And so feasibly, they could be promoted to a lieutenant and then keep getting promoted. And at some point after the war was over, what often happened is you had this lieutenant, a major, captain who didn't have a college degree. And they're like, okay, go to college. And then he would go to college, and then he would stay an officer. He would just go to college, take some time off, and then come back. A lot of times the Army would pay for that college too. And they do nowadays. They pay for your master's degree in a lot of cases. There's programs where you just take off and do your master's. So that's the history of that. So fast forward to when I enlisted, you had to have a high school degree to enlist. And then you could have a college degree to enlist. And usually my experience was if you had a college degree and you enlisted in the 80s, it was a trick. You listen to the recruiter and he's, hey, go in there, go to basic training, tell them you want to be an officer and you'll go to officer course. And it's not that easy. You have to get recommended by your commanding officer, and a lot of them don't want to recommend you until they see what kind of a soldier you would have made, because they don't want dumb officers ideally, and they don't want arrogant officers. So if you go in as an enlisted guy and you have a degree and you're like, I'm better than everybody else, maybe you're not the right officer that they want. I did meet a couple people who enlisted for whatever reason, and sometimes they enlisted to get their student loans paid off. The thing is, you need to do your own research if you're going to enlist and talk to your recruiters and stuff, because if you have a degree, you can enlist you can come in the Army, enlist. I don't know if that's the right term, but I assume it is. If you want to come in as an officer, I still think you're enlisting, but you're not an enlisted. So when you enlist to be an officer, you'll get your contract and you'll go to OCS. A lot of people do that, have done ROTC in college, or they went to an academy, like an Air Force Academy or the West Point or something like that, Annapolis. And then they're actually commissioned at the end of graduation from college, as are you in ROTC. If you have a ROTC contract, you can also you'll commission at the end of college, and then you'll go to OCS, something like that. So that's a difference. And then if you want to apply while you're in the military, go ahead.
Is it really a contract that you're signing to say, I'm going to put in so and so many years of service after I get through this education? Or what is the terms of the contract?
We all signed some kind of contract. I don't know what the officer contract says, but the enlisted contract is for a number of years. Mm-hmm. So when I came in, you could sign from 3 to 6 years. And there was different advantages. Sometimes they didn't have enough cooks. They're like, hey, we'll give you $10,000, you sign up for 6 years to be a cook, as opposed to, I want to be an infantryman. We got a lot of those, so we're not going to give you anything, but you can still sign up for 6 years if you want. And so the average enlistment, I think, I was never a recruiter, but the average enlistment is about 4 years. And that's what the average of all my peers was when I came in. We signed up for 4 years. And that includes your basic training and your advanced individual. AIT is the next thing you do after basic training, which teaches you your skill, your profession while you're in the military, of which there's like hundreds different kinds of ones. And you go to advanced infantry training is what I want. Advanced individual training, which I went to as an infantryman. And some AITs last a year. The intelligence ones, the language, if you're a linguist, that could be a year and a half if you're going to learn Chinese or something. So if you sign up for 4 years, like that's why they would insist you sign up for 6 years. If you're going to be a Chinese linguist for instance, they send you 2 years to learn Chinese. You go through basic training, and then you get out and you got 3 years left, and they're like, dang. So that's why they have these different amounts of enlistment. I don't know many people who signed up for less than 4 years initially, but I think there was some out there when I came in. Every year it's different. Also depends on, I think when the global war of terror, I think after 9/11, they were like, they just needed the bodies because they didn't know what they were going to expect. So they were like, you could come in for 3 years or maybe even 2 years or something like that. We'd go to infantrymen, and then we could beef up all our combat arms units for temporarily. So it goes up and down. The bonuses go up and down. There's some bonuses that are 20,000 for professions that just aren't filled. But there's a reason, I will say, there's a reason that some professions aren't filled. Some professions just don't have enough upward mobility. By that means you're not going to get promoted. You may get a $20,000 bonus to be, for instance, a rigger. And I've never been a rigger, so I'm just speaking from hearsay. But in the upper, there's only so many sergeants at the fifth. So there's 9 levels of sergeants, right? 9 levels of enlisted. And the top 5 are sergeants, types of sergeants. And then every time you go up a level of enlisted, you get more pay, right? So at the top 5 levels of sergeants, there's only so many positions because it's a pyramid, just like anywhere else in a corporation or something. You got so many managers, so many sub-managers. And so there's only so many, I know there's a lot more riggers than 100 riggers, but let's say there's only 100 riggers. You only need 20 sub-managers, and then you only need 3 senior managers, and you only need 1 supreme manager, right? So your ability to get promoted, for instance, for one thing, there's a lot of competition for those 4 or 5, 20 positions or whatever. And second of all, there's just not that many. You have to wait till that guy dies or leaves or retires or whatever. So when you look at it like that.
Is this information at all visible to people who are enlisting and making a choice when they probably don't know much about the military? Or do they get shunted off into these choices maybe without a lot of context? I'm thinking of how people choose college majors, for example. They have no freaking idea. It's a rare, teenager or person in their young 20s who thinks long-term strategically. It just doesn't come naturally to us if the information isn't presented. What's your sense about it?
Does a 22-year-old is applying to a business actually look at like their promotion mobility? Or are they just happy to have a job? And then you take that back to a 17, 18-year-old, which is where people are coming in the military if they don't have a college degree, even a less kind of awareness of that, right? Maybe a 22-year-old going into business or law understands that concept a lot better because they want to be a partner and they understand how that works. But if you look at an 18-year-old who just doesn't have any concept of anything but working at maybe a fast food or a restaurant or maybe Walmart retail or something, and they only did it for a couple of years and no one was ever considering them at 16 to be a manager, they never looked at it that way. It also depends on the goals, right? If you really only honestly want to say, I want to serve because I want to learn how to do this and the military is going to teach me for free and then I can get out and have this skill. Or B, I just want to serve because I don't really know what I want to do. I want to make some money and I want to have a little adventure. And I'm only going to serve 4 years. And that's my goal. And a lot of people do that. I'm only going to serve 4 years. I'm going to go learn Chinese. And I'm going to serve 5 years and that's it. Because I want to go to China and work for a business or something like that. Then take the freaking $50,000 bonus to be a Chinese interpreter and you never get promoted, but you in 5 years, you probably would only get promoted to like specialist, maybe sergeant. No, you probably get promoted to a E5, which is sergeant, or maybe a staff sergeant if you're lucky. So if you only get to that level, because really you only did 5 years in the company, if you want to look at it that way, and that's what your goal was, to make the $50,000 bonus, learn Chinese and get out, then you're success, right? If you want a long-term career in the military, you're going to have to, it'd be better if you picked a job which has that you enjoy, that has the mobility, the ability for you to get promoted to the next and ideally the highest level of sergeant major as an enlisted guy. There's other people who go in the Army and they want to be an officer. So they go in the Army, get the GI Bill, do 4 years, get out, go to college, become an officer, come back in. They already got 5 years in the military. Now they only have to do 15 more to retire. And that's their goal. But I would say when you get to the recruiter's office, have an idea of what you think you want to do. I'm not saying mine didn't change 16 times and I went straight in the infantry. Now, the good thing about the infantry is there's a lot of upward mobility because there's 100,000 infantry people and there's a lot of sub managers that need to get in there. And there's also 20 or 30% are getting out every year because they only wanted to do 4 years, or they were dissatisfied with the Army, or they weren't really great soldiers in the first place. So no one wanted them to stick around, or whatever their reason was. So 20 and like when I went to the Rangers at the end of my 4 years, or let's say three and a half years or whatever, a third of them got out of the military and went to college or went back to work at their family business or whatever. A third of them went on to do other stuff in the military. And a third of them went to special operations. Right there at the end of 4 years, 1/3 of the military needs to get replaced. Someone needs to replace that. And so the recruiters are always trying to do that. And then that other third was like, I did my tough stuff. I'm ready to move on. And because at the end of your first enlistment, it's usually acceptable for you to say, I want to do something else in the military, because you're still young enough where you can get taught a new profession like journalism or nursing or whatever, be it you can work in a hospital as a medic or something like that, X-ray tech. And then, so an X-ray tech's not an officer. So you can go, I want to be an X-ray tech. And then you go become a basic medic. And then you go to X-ray tech school and you become an X-ray tech. And then that's really pretty good money in the outside world as well. They decided they don't want to wake up at 6:30 and run 5 miles at 4-minute pace and get abused by other sergeants and do push-ups all day and carry big rucksacks around. And I said, okay, I did my 4 years doing that. I was tough. I'm going to move on and do something else and think about my life, my family life, and my professional life outside the military by getting another skill or something like that. And then there's the ones that did that for 4 or 5 years like me and said, I want to do something tougher. And what's that look like? Now, the other balance to that, I know you have something else to say, but a question, but is, so in the Rangers, right? The Rangers have another pyramid that's different from, say, the Green Berets. The lowest rank of a Green Beret starts at the level 6 of a sergeant. So the lowest guy on the team is already a 6. So if you come in the military, you want to go in the Green Berets, you're going to get promoted to the 6th level of enlistment within the first probably 3 years, right? And that's a huge bonus. Now, if you come in as in the Rangers, you come in as the first level private, and then you get promoted to 2nd level private level 2, and then you get to private first class, and then you get to specialist or corporal, and then you get to sergeant. And it takes a while to get each one of those. And you may be, if you're lucky, you may be a 6 by the end of those 4 years. But you really earned it. You worked your ass off for that. And I'm not saying the Green Berets didn't either. They went through 2.5 years of grueling course and learning a lot of stuff and doing a lot of physical events too. They just went through it a different way and they got promoted faster. And when you look at the Rangers, so the minimum level, each Green Beret team has 5 E6s on it and 4 E7s. So there's a funnel there it's almost like this, because
Right.
4 out of the 5 are going to get a promotion. There's a spot for them, right? So as they get promoted, and you can only stay on a team for 3 to 4 years before you need to move on to a kind of a staff instructional thing, and then you can come back to a team later on. So every 3 or 4 years, those 4 E7s are moving out, and 4 of those E6s are moving that shot. So you have this upward movement that's really obvious. And in the Rangers, 1 out of every 35 guys is an E7.
So at least for you, the choice of moving on from the Rangers was, in that context, pretty clear. If you wanted to continue to advance, your chances are much better going to the Green Beret.
I didn't really think of it that way at the time. I just thought, okay, what am I going to, if I stay here, I'll have the best I can do in a year or 2 is get promoted and be in charge of 8 guys doing the exact same thing. And then if I'm lucky, in 3 or 4 years after that, I'll get promoted and I'll be in charge of 30 guys. But I ended up getting my E6 in 4 years out of the Rangers. So I ended up on a Green Beret team as an E6 but you weren't allowed to go Green Berets straight out of civilian world back then. After, it wasn't until 9/11 that they had these, they called them SF babies, where they come out of high school or whatever and go into the Green Beret course. And then I was an E7, but I spent 3 years in the Green Berets, and then I was an E7, which is not common. There's just not enough space in the infantry and especially the Rangers, for you to stay in the Rangers. And there's only so many people who can get that spot. And there's only so many spots. So that's just something to think about if you want to stay in and you want to do that. I don't know very many people that stayed in the Rangers through their whole career and get to Sergeant Major. I'm sure there's a couple out there. I think I know one, actually, but it's not very common, because at some point they force you to go become a recruiter or to do other things in the Army. And then you may come back if there's space for you. The higher in rank you get, the less and less jobs there are. And in the Green Berets, there's a lot more options. So
I think from our earlier discussions, Randy, I've gotten the sense from you that there are, and I see this in the business world as well, if you come with too fixed an idea of how things are going to go, you miss the chance for random opportunities that come up. You might have a way to proceed or do something interesting in your career that your boss at that time makes you aware of that you didn't know about, but you're like, oh yeah, I guess if I'm open to it, that would be another way to get some experience or do something interesting or something new. I want to take a step back though to make sure we address what I think is at least a big part of the question about whether one wants to consider the military as a career or not. There's 2 angles to this, and you can answer them in any way. You partly answered the one, which is how many people actually do make a career of the military. You were talking about the Rangers and said a third of them get out, a third of them do something else, and a third of them go on to special ops. But do you have any sense, even at a very high level, how many people make the military their career and put in a full 20 years versus do some shorter stint? That's one question. And the second question, even more foundational, is how many people or how hard is it to enlist in the Army? Is this something that anybody can just wake up tomorrow and say, yeah, I'm going to do it? Or how do we want to think about what sort of a person you need to be, what sort of, besides the college education, which we talked about for officer OCS, or ROTC, so those are the 2 questions. How many stay and how many can actually do it to begin with?
So I'll start with the second question first. And I don't know if you know who Tim Kennedy is. He was an MMA fighter. He was also in the Green Berets. He was in 7th Group for a while. He just wrote a book called Scars and Stripes. That's pretty good. And he was on Joe Rogan, and he's now in the National Guard. They actually he was an MMA fighter. He fought MMA before he joined the military. He would join the military after 9/11. And then he got into special forces, and he wanted to continue fighting. And there are certain things you can't do in the military sometimes. Like you can't take a second job if it will interfere with your military job. And the person that gets to decide that is your company commander, your commander. So if you decide you want to deliver pizzas, you have to ask for permission. If you decide you want to go to college, you have to ask for permission at certain ranks because they want to make sure that you're not.
All these side businesses you did of delivering food and making t-shirts, those were company
Authorized.
commander approved? Authorized. Okay,
Of course.
cool.
Yeah. But so you have to ask the question. And then you have a lot of times, I believe, I'm not a doctor in the military, obviously, but I think there's doctors that want to do a side job bar working at the local hospital in the emergency room or something. But the problem with that is they're already working whatever it is. They're already working 12-hour shifts in our emergency room, and now they're working a 12-hour shift, and then they can't be called in at the last minute. So they have to ask for permission, and everyone's got to figure out if that's in the best service of the military, right? If all the soldiers are going to get their big bang for their buck from you. So there's different things like that. So also, if the job you're going to do is dangerous, like MMA, where you're going to have a broken arm the next day, maybe, is that serving the military? Can you do your Green Beret job if you broke your arm in your MMA job and then you're out for 2 months, right? He was still wanting to fight, and the unit was like, no, we just spent $500,000 to train you as a sniper and a Green Beret and a ninja, and so we don't want you to fight. And there's pros and cons to that, right? Because we can put him in an admin job and then he becomes a good marketing for Green Berets. He gets in the UFC and he's out there and he's like, hey, Tim Kennedy, 7th Special Forces Group, Green Beret. And everyone's, oh, the Green Beret. And then he kicks everyone's ass like, oh, I want to be a Green Beret. So it's just good marketing. So there was a bunch. I know some people that were involved in kind of this. I don't know all the details, but I'm sure there was a debate. Like the commanders or the lawyers probably got involved too. And people were like, if he breaks his arm, he's like, yeah, but if he's in an admin job, he can still do his job. And this is good marketing for the Green Berets, and the Marines do it so well. And there's back and forth. And ultimately they said no. And then the National Guard unit in Texas said, hey, if you get out, we'll let you be in the Green Berets and the National Guard and you can market for us. And he said, sold. He said, sold, I'll do it. And that's what he's been doing for a while. And that's when he went on to Joe Rogan to talk. Joe Rogan's, hey, how are you? Because in his book, Scars and Stripes, he actually goes to Afghanistan to help people get evacuated and stuff like that. And he's like, hey, if you're in the National Guard and you're doing all this stuff and you're still fighting and stuff, how do you do all that? He's like, let me show you. Hey, join the military. National Guard's a great place to get an education, become a man. There you go. I'm on Joe Rogan's show advertising for the National Guard. So anyway, he said on Joe Rogan's show, and I did a little research afterwards, that it's actually easier to get into the college than it is in the military. And Joe Rogan goes, come on. He's think about it. You can actually, even if you don't have the grades, you can go to a community college and go to there for 2 years, bring your grades up, and then get into college. And most state colleges will take you from a community college if you got decent grades. That's valid. But in the military, you have to pass an intelligence test. If you don't pass it, you're not getting in. But if you are just a dumb whatever and you go to the community college, they will help you. Even you have to take an English and math basic test, but if you score really low, they'll send you to a basic English and math class until you because they'll take your money and you'll go to college, right? Now, can you get into any college you want? No. Can you automatically get into a state college without trying? Probably not. But you can't get in the Army at all if you don't pass this intelligence test. All right. And then second of all, you have to be able to have some basic fitness when you walk in the door. And people and teenagers specifically are less and less fit. And they have to beat a weight test or a tape test. They have to be able to do 10 push-ups or something. I don't know it changes every year, but they have to do a basic amount of physical fitness to get in the door to basic training. And they have to not have done any drugs in their life or been in medical or mental care. Or so that if you look at those and you look at all those check marks on someone for the average person coming through their door, and then check, oh, sorry, you're out. Next. So if you look at all those restrictions, now, if you do drugs, are the colleges looking at the drugs you did? No. Are they looking at any mental health problems? No. Are they looking if you're overweight? No. So if you look at it from that point of view, it's Tim Kennedy's quote is 70% of the people of age to join the Army are not qualified. Also, if you have a a criminal past. If you've been arrested as a teenager, you're not supposed to be. There's waivers for a lot of this stuff, but most of the people that need a waiver for one of them need a waiver for 2 or 3 or 4. So then it gets more and more difficult. So I'll just stop there. That's one of the questions. You got any questions more about that?
Yeah, I'm curious about the intelligence test. You don't hear that used much outside of the military context. It used to be one of the most important principles that was correlated with predicting a person's performance, but it became taboo, I guess, outside the military to talk about intelligence tests of any kind. But the psychology profession worked really hard to come up with measures of a person's intelligence that then well, actually, I'll say it this way. The tests that are used to get into graduate school and into college, the SAT, the GRE, the LSAT, the MCAT, those are all disguised intelligence tests. Actually, they're quite similar to intelligence tests. What does the military intelligence test look like? Is it just multiple choice questions, or do you remember?
Yeah, so it's all multiple choice. I haven't taken it obviously in over 30 years, but it's pretty similar. It's called the ASVAB, and I don't know what that stands for right now, but it's multiple short tests, anywhere from 30 to 60 questions, all multiple choice. And when I say IQ, I mean it tests your math and English, okay? But the main purpose of this test is to see what jobs you would be best suited for, okay? So they have some clerical and aptitude stuff.
Yeah.
So they have some clerical stuff. They have some stuff for like mechanics. They have like gears. If a gear goes this way and this way, which way does this gear go? Stuff like that. They have some spatial tests. They have a variety of different tests. And the people who developed them said, if you combine this score with this score and you get above a 70 on those two combined scores, you'd make a good mechanic. If you get this score, so then at the end, the recruiter, after you come back, the recruiter said, you're eligible for the following jobs in the military. Now the military has, I don't know at one time it was over 200, maybe it's 300 jobs now. I don't know. There's 300 named jobs in the military, from cook to mechanic to special operator to linguist to intelligence to communications to cyber. All that stuff is in there. All the medical professions as well. So they'll look at it and say, you needed a minimum score to get what did you want to do? I want to be a nurse. A nurse is an officer. So then they would say, okay, you can be a medic and then you can get a college degree and then you can become a nurse, but you can't go in as a nurse. All right, I want to be a medic. All right, so a medic's got to have this. And they would say, and then if you didn't get it, they said, you didn't qualify for a medic, but you can qualify for this. You can go in, you can study for the test, retake it one more time while you're in the military. And if you get it, you can reclassify. And sometimes I've heard people come in the Army like that. Maybe that's not the best way to come in the Army because you may never get that score. You can take it a second time while you're outside and study. And unlike when I came in the military, there's now online programs, which just SAT and ACT, where you just take it over and over and you study it and you can get higher and higher scores. And there's people that will do classes with you outside of the military to help you get higher scores. So if you prepare to do what you want to do, then it shouldn't be that hard to do.
So the claim, Randy, that it's harder to get into the military than it is to college is completely credible when you also consider the incentives. You already mentioned it, right? The colleges, and there's lots of different ones, are interested they're selling a product. So they're happy to take your money, whether or not you're suited for that product. And the college statistics are quite depressing in the sense of how many people go who never ultimately complete their degree. 70%, last research I saw suggested that 70% of high school graduates go on to college right now, but only 40% of that ultimately will have a degree after 6 years. So those people, one could have said, should have had a better entrance exam to see if they were suited for it. But the colleges aren't interested in doing that because they're getting money from their customers. The military is the exact opposite. If you think about it, the military is spending money to train you, and they're paying you your salary, but also investing in your training. And they don't want to do that if you're not ultimately going to be, if you can tell at the beginning that you're not suited for it for whatever reason, either physically or mentally. So it actually is credible, and it probably is counterintuitive, but once you hear it explained that way, it does totally make sense. Some of the branches of the military play up the difficulty of succeeding, that it's elite, you're going to be part of a special select few. And I guess that is true. So any sense of how many people get past the first hurdle, but then wash out, don't make it through basic training, or I guess the testing process can't be perfect.
So once they get you, they want to keep you. So once you get through the recruiting and you're one of those 30% that they had a hard time finding to begin with, they want you to succeed. They want you to get through basic training. They want you to be a good soldier. And so I think the number, I don't know the figures. I'm sure someone could Google them, but the reality is everyone involved in the process wants you to pass, and they're willing to keep you there until you pass. Maybe you don't want to stay there until you pass, but maybe they'll recycle you and keep you till you pass. And when you don't pass, a lot of people have to go through a process of like, why didn't this guy pass? How did you fail him? Not how he failed himself. How did the people that were supposed to get you to pass fail? And what did we do to make sure he didn't fail? And how did that process fail? And so very few people, if they want to stay in, I think, fail basic training. There's obviously some behavioral things that won't be tolerated. And also if you end up showing some mental problems going through it, if you get physically hurt or break your arm and get recycled, or do something, hurt something even more where it's not even a question of whether you'll continue or not, then obviously I think those are the exceptions. I think a physical injury, I know one guy in particular who lied when he came in. He had a torn ACL, didn't tell anyone. And he did basic training for like halfway through, and then he had a really critical injury. So they recycled him. They didn't notice that he didn't have ACL. They didn't do an MRI. They did an X-ray, and they're like, because you got a little break in your whatever, so we'll just recycle you. And then he went through it again, failed again. This time they did an MRI, and they're like, hey, you don't have an ACL. And he's like, I was born that way. And you're like, yeah, I don't think so. Tell us the truth. And he's like, I lied. Okay, you got me. I lied. And then they all process them from the military. I think it's very few that if they don't want to pass basic training, they don't continue. And then they go to AIT. AIT also requires you to perform. And hey, if you're going to be a medic, you need to pass the medic school. The thing is, the lowest denominator is the infantry school. So you fail the medic school, then maybe they'll give you another choice. If you fail that, then they're like, okay, you know what? You're going to be an infantry guy. That's our lowest common denominator. And then if you can't pass that, then maybe you shouldn't be in the military. I don't think many people don't pass infantrymen. On the other hand, some people never wanted to be there in the first place, so maybe they're not the best soldiers. So those are probably the people that by the time you failed out of 2 individual trainings and got to infantry training, you might only have a year and a half left on your contract. So you might not be re-enlisting is probably the answer to that. And as far as the other question, I'll do the retirement question in a minute. Got any questions on that one?
Yeah, I guess I want to understand what people are doing during basic training and AIT, and whether really that's not what I want to know. What I want to know is, you've referred to the word ruck several times. You've talked about ruck marches and ruck in different contexts. And I assume that's putting on a honking big backpack and doing physical things. But what is the fascination with rucking? And tell me about the importance of it to your basic training and your military life, and why it's so important. Or am I misunderstanding you? Because I've heard you refer to it many times.
So yeah, rucking is marching with a backpack, and there's a skill to it so you don't hurt yourself, because
I can imagine
you're marching with military equipment, not the most comfortable backpack from REI. And you're also carrying more weight than you would probably like to if you're just going on a weekend backpacking trip in the mountains with your dog or something like that. So obviously there's pressure points. You end up with permanent skin rubbed off in certain areas of your back and things like that. And so the thing about my life with rucking is I was infantry, and then I was ranger, which is basically infantry, airborne infantry. So you get parachuted in somewhere and you walk out instead of walking in to the combat. And then I was SF, which is similar. You're parachuted in somewhere or infilled somehow and you walk out. So you're always walking with everything you are going to use most of the time. So as a result, we often practice walking with heavy backpacks so that we know that the unit can get somewhere with all their equipment. And we may walk with just enough to survive and fight for a week. Maybe that's the objective. And then we get resupplied with parachute equipment and a parachute or something like that. and we recover that, and then we resupply, and then we keep walking for a week or something like that. So that's the obsession with rucking is always, hey, we have to, the whole 200-man unit has to ruck to make sure that we can do it. And then we have to figure out, every time we did this in rehearsal, out of the 200 people, 10% were heat casualties, and we had to carry them out or we had to evacuate them. So how do we make that less? So we have to practice again and say, make sure people are hydrated. Okay, we only had 5 this time, but the heat index was a lot less. And then we have to, so now the commander can make a good assessment of casualties before the war even started, because it took us, we got 10% of our casualties were on the way to the war or to the battle or to the fight or whatever. So that's all stuff that needs to be, the lower enlisted guy, like when I was doing it, I'm like, what, again, why are we doing this? But at the higher level, you can see the purpose, which is, I don't know, my guys are looking kind of fat today. I don't know if they can make it or something like that. That's the whole point of them doing physical training every day, is to keep them fit. But being running and lifting fit is different than being able to carry the average. So we actually have competitions, and we have best soldiers and stuff. And that involves a 20-mile backpack walk / run, because it's about whoever gets finished first. So they may run with it. And then I think the average is, not for special operations, but the average for like infantry, I think, is like a 35 or 40 pound backpack, not including food and water. So anything that you can consume while you're walking doesn't count. So you get weight, at the beginning, you'll get weight at different points in the middle, and you get weight at the end. And you have to have a minimum of whatever the minimum was in the beginning, 35 or 40. They have a badge that you can get called the expert infantry badge, and you have to do 40 different tasks, shooting and rucking and mortars, calling in mortars and things like that infantrymen have to do. And one of them is a 12-man, I think it's a 12-mile ruck with 35 pounds plus water and food. When you go through like the Ranger course or the Green Beret course, you show up at this time with 50 pounds in your ruck, you'll weigh it, and then you start walking, and you may do 20, 30 miles or something like that. There's a really good Ruck Up and Shut Up is a book that just came out that was written by a doctor. I don't think a medical doctor, I think a academic doctor, but he was also in the Green Berets. He got out, got a degree, came back to work at the Green Beret assessment course to study it, to do analytics for it. And then he wrote this book about how much the course has changed for the good and for the bad, and with the evolution of the course, and then what the course is looking for. And that he also, I think he runs a course on land navigation for people preparing to go to the course and things like that. But he basically said, and I did it, it's 2 weeks of you having a 45 to 50 pound backpack on your back the whole time, because your terrain walking with a map, and you have a backpack on your back the whole time you're terrain mapping. You're doing other tasks, but every time you do it, you're having to move somewhere with your backpack. So it's basically, and it's not just your back, it's your feet, right? Because you're pushing, you're walking, you're rubbing on your boot and all that stuff. So there's always blisters. Everyone's getting blisters on their feet. They're getting blisters and abrasions on their back through this whole process. So that's what rucking's about. They actually have, we talked about this, they have a Go Ruck, which is a company that's run by some special operators, and they set up races like marathons. That you can sponsor one for cancer or whatever, you can call them up, and they'll set up a race, they'll set up a route, and then they give you hey, you have to show up with a backpack with so much weight, and they'll have the weigh stations and the water stations and all that stuff.
All right, this is fascinating, Randy. I'm sensitive to the fact that we've been talking a while, so I will let you decide which are the points that you still want to get out today about what you wanted to say about enlisting in the Army. I think you've already covered quite a bit more. I've gained an appreciation for the fact that the things that a person does, from the beginning, the selection process, the assessment process, the training that you go through. This is also obvious in hindsight, but it's interesting to hear it this way. It serves a purpose, right? They're not doing this randomly or just to torture people. It serves a specific purpose to figure out who's suited for what. How do we get everyone moved along to a certain level, and then figure out how to use people's talents in the optimal way, which, let's face it, the purpose of militaries is to help countries defend their interests and pursue their interests by force. And that's a serious goal that you're trying to accomplish. And you need to take people who come from very different backgrounds and very different skills and abilities, and somehow A, make them all useful, and then B, get the best out of them. And I'm gaining a much better appreciation for just how A, big a task that is, and B, how the military seems to do it actually pretty well. There's lots of ways for a person to make their way, and somehow through some magic of motivation, hard work, and just experimentation over decades, I guess, they've figured out how to make people excel in their chosen careers better, I would have guessed, I'm guessing, than private enterprise a lot of the time. Because what happens if in a company I'm not happy with how a person's doing? I don't go all out to try and, of course I want to keep them, but I haven't invested nearly as much in them as the military has in you. So I'm like, all right, fine, you're just not a good fit for the organization, you're out of here, you go find your way some other way. So anyway, I do appreciate just how much thought seems to have gone into an experimentation. How do we effectively get people to do what we need them to do and do it well without burning them out, keeping the whole organization going?
Yeah, I think we should have another episode about careers in the military and retirement. I think that's a whole episode on itself. So let's put that on the back burner. The only thing I'd like to add is that, so all this rucking and jumping out of airplanes and other things is hard on your body. And you get hurt, and sometimes you get permanently hurt. It's hard on your knees, it's hard on your back. After 20 years of it, you're like, you're older than you should be in some ways. And I would say, and I don't know the statistics on this, but from my experience from a lot of women who do this, it's harder on the women because of their bone structure and everything like that. And I've seen women train to go to the Ranger course, the Green Beret course and stuff, and men get hurt too, don't get me wrong, but it seems like the women are getting more hurt more often. And I don't have any statistics on this, but I know personally one that I helped train to go to the Green Beret course. She was really physical fit, West Point grad. And she really wanted to go to the Green Beret course when they opened it up 4 or 5 years ago for women. And she did not pass the assessment. And she ended up getting 2 shoulder surgeries, hip surgery, because walking with 50 or 60 pounds on your back or running with it every day is really hard on your body. And every person I know who did what I did for 20 years has permanent damage in some way where they're getting some kind of disability check from the military because they did it and the military caused it, they get some disability for it. And I think they would probably trade that disability check for 100% health, but they don't have that option, obviously. And I'm really concerned about the women that we're putting in all these physically challenging positions. A lot of the women who would be really great at it, they would be really great at it because they're working at such a high level that they're in professional sports or training for the Olympics because they're so good at it. And the women that end up coming in the Army that are trying to get to that level a lot of them are getting hurt. Some of them are doing great. A few of them are doing great. They get through the whole thing and they're in great physical shape and they get through it and they do great. But a lot of them that are trying to do it, a lot more than the men, are falling by the wayside and are getting injured by it. So it's just something to be cautious about. As long as you know what you're getting into, I just hope that everyone, when you look at this as a career, you realize that you need to be in really good shape, that you need to stay in that shape in order not to get hurt. And you probably just marathon runners and all these other people that dedicate themselves to sports, Olympics, athletes and stuff, they're not all functional by the end of their career. I'm pretty sure some gymnasts have probably got some deficiencies by the end of their gymnast careers and things like that. So
I think that would be interesting to follow up on a little bit more, Randy, in the next episode or whenever we do it, when you talk about the careers in the military. What is the consequence all around of staying in for, what is it, a 20-year stint, I think, until you can retire? And
we'll talk about that next time.
Men versus women. So I like it. It's a good topic. And hey, thanks for covering this in such detail today. I always learn a lot, and therefore I assume some of our listeners are learning a lot. And it was a good discussion today, Randy. Thanks. Thanks for listening, everybody.
All right. Yep. And leave some comments if you guys got any more questions about this, and we'll see you next time.
We'd love to hear what you think. So please comment on the show with your thoughts. We read all of your comments.
Thanks for joining us, and thanks for subscribing. See you next time.